You heard a couple of the other speakers talk about the result of data, and what I want to take you through today is I want to talk to you about why, and I want to give you a real story, and then we're going to talk about your processes just very briefly, then we're going to get into the foundation of data, and then we'll get very specific about KPIs. So this guy right here is Judge Paul Friedman, and he oversaw in-ray black farmer discrimination litigation. I won't bore you with the details, except to say this ended up being one of the largest civil rights class actions in U.S. history. It had a class membership of close to 100,000 people. We were required to have a claims process in only 6 months that gave every claimant across the United States the opportunity to sit knee to knee, go over a 16-page claim form that the attorney had to sign under penalty of perjury. Simple. Here's how I did it. The Havershine formula is this big, long logarithm that essentially is what you use when you use Google Maps. You go from point A to point B. There's a couple of firms here I plugged it in there. I had to come up with a way of how could I possibly calculate the optimal place to have all of these meetings for 100,000 people in the United States. Can you imagine Google mapping every single one? Just shoot me in the face. There had to be a better way. Now, some of you may not believe this, but it's true. I have never, at any level, not in high school, not in undergrad, not in graduate school, I have never taken a computer class in my life. Everything is self-taught. I don't say this a lot in a speaking engagement, but my high school GPA was 2.31, which is probably why I enlisted in the Marine Corps after. But I did ultimately go to Northwestern, so I had some juice in the tank. I just didn't apply it and needed the lesson. But my point in telling you that is any of you can learn what we're going to cover today. It really does take discipline. That's really what it takes. This formula was seminal in the ability to get the maximum fee award. In the court's opinion, he specifically cited we had 384 group meetings in 6 months in 66 cities, 23 states, and in DC. It was unbelievable. What carried the day is I was able to show with math and data that every claimant, or 97% of the claimants, had an opportunity, that's all we required, an opportunity to sit knee to knee with a lawyer. When the court heard that, it was the foundation for all of the other things that happened. You know, in a process like this, some claimant complains about the lawyer this, the lawyer didn't hear that, or, you know, whatever. But the credibility that we had by using data with this court, and he went to law school in 1964, and he saw the value of data. It ended up resulting in a maximum fee award of $90 million. Now that's the kind of math everybody lit up on. But it was the Havershine formula math that added those dollar signs and decimal points. That's a little bit of an extreme example. What we're going to talk about today is very, very simple stuff. I'm going to try and make it as entertaining as possible, but it is still data. Now, normally when I have speaking engagements like this, they save the slides for the end of the event instead of the beginning of the event. So some of my jokes are going to fall a little flat because you guys already know what this is. But this is the classic pushing the boulder uphill. How many of you think you have a stupid process in your law firm? You don't have to raise your hand, because the truth is you all do. Even James Scott Farron. Everybody does. Everybody does, because there's these sacred cows, these sacred processes that nobody wants to address. And what you find is, this is an old thing called the Rube Goldberg machine. You know, one of those contraptions, some of you may have seen this before, where you go through these ridiculous amount of steps to, in this instance, open a bottle of beer, right? So you see the guys lighting the candle, burning the match, you see the whole thing. How many of you think you have a process like this in your law firm? Because I have a client who that's their demand process. And it's actually truncated to make it fit the slide. I'll represent to you there's more steps. It's 2024. So let's talk about data use. So the use of data is not new. Anybody, I guess you do, I'm going to fast forward, the Enigma machine, right? This is how the Germans were able to communicate in World War II by their submarines. It took data to stop it. This is not a new thing. I think that one of the challenges that we have in the legal community is we're precedential in our thinking. How it's always been done is how it needs to be done. If you're sitting in this room today, you've at least taken a step to recognizing there's value in things like KPIs or benchmarking or all of kind of the sexy terms. But very often, you don't know how to get there. And today, we're going to talk about this. This slide is really one that I find really resonates with a lot of folks. If you go to a doctor's appointment, we all have to get blood work at some time. Blood work is the definition of data. I don't care who the doctor is. I don't care how skilled they are, Harvard, Yale trained, doesn't matter. They need data to properly evaluate your condition. Are you following me? Are you seeing where we're going with that? If you want to compete in today's law firm, in today's legal environment, it's not even about using data to get the case before the other guy does. It's now about being efficient, which is eventually going to become an ethical requirement for how you are servicing your clients. We are seeing data and technology evolve rapidly. I know Ken's going to talk about AI out there. It's the Wild West out there. A lot of the products that you see that are saying AI, they're not really AI. They're using data, but not in an automated way that you might see on TV or you might think like Alexa or something like that. It's really important that you understand the foundation of data and how it's used in your firm, how you can leverage it in a variety of ways, not just KPIs. And we're going to talk about that. One of my favorite quotes of all time is, I mean, there's 1,000 more crass examples of this I can give you, but essentially, if you don't have data, it's just an opinion. And I will tell you, I have the opportunity. My clients are some of the top advertising law firms in the country. Top 5 spender in the United States. Ken already talked about James Scott Farron. But I also have clients who are very niche litigators. They would rather be shot in the face than advertise on TV. But they are recognizing that their processes, remember the Rube Goldberg machine? They do intakes on cuneiform. I mean, they're so bass-ackwards, they don't even know where to start. So they hire us to come in there and bring them a state-of-the-art intake process. So make no mistake, this isn't just about competing for cases. It is about getting your processes and your data in order. This should be, like, if there's 10 commandments in your particular religious tradition, this should be the first commandment of your law firm. If it's not in your system, I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's GrowPath, FileVine, Litify, whatever it is. You really need to commit and enforce this precept in your firm that if it's not in your case management system, if it's not in your intake system, then it didn't happen. I want to emphasize this, and it's odd because it's coming from a data nerd like me. Anybody know what this picture is? The one thing that wasn't in my slide deck in advance? What's that? Okay, what kind of stuff? Yes? Sonar. So sonar doesn't give you like a complete picture, right? It just says, there's a there, take a look at it. I would submit to you that that is the data that we're talking about. You are never going to hear me from the stage say any data is dispositive, fire that person because of this single data point. That's not what I am suggesting. What I'm suggesting is well-constructed data, well-understood data. We're going to talk about different types of law firms and how they use data. In concert with the human element is really, really important. You cannot just run your firm like Moneyball. But I promise you, your firm will run better if you've got Moneyball. Not the same statement. So let's talk about data literacy. So in a perfect world, you've got firms that are reading their data, they're understanding it, they're using it, they're leveraging it. I don't think there's a law firm in America that is here. And here's what I mean by that. You'll have law firms that have, they want this, but they're completely out of whack. Their data consumption and their design on data doesn't match their appetite. You'll see firms that love, we want to measure everything. One of the speakers was over here talking about how they were measuring kind of every little detail. If you use it, that's great. One of the tricks that I tell my client firms when they have entirely too many reports is I will pick 10 reports and I'll just stop them for a week. Stop them for 2 weeks. Stop them for a month. There's some poor staff person that's working and collecting that data and they're not even using it. So you have to make sure that you're collecting meaningful data that gives you actionable intelligence. So what do I mean by that? If I see a data point and I see data coming across my desk and it says intakes are down, one of the speakers said, rightly so, it's the most important thing that's happening in your law firm is your intakes. If you are not immediately reacting to that data, then you might as well not collect it. It defeats the entire purpose. It would be like you have the check engine light and the low oil light on your car, and you're just like, oh, that's nice, and you just ignore it. There's consequences for ignoring it. You'll have a blown engine. In a law firm, if you ignore certain data points, you're going to blow your engine. This is exactly the law firm I'm talking about. They love their data, but they're using needles or a spreadsheet or some other point, and some poor paralegal, I've been in shops where the paralegal is literally spending 25, 30 hours a week navigating this menagerie of spreadsheets. And here's the worst part about it. I've yet to see them reconcile. You need to have a single source of truth. So if you are not using a case management system, you need to use one. If you are serious about intakes and you have any meaningful volume, you likely also need an intake software. You may choose to do an all-in-one software like GrowPath. You may choose to kind of go ad hoc like a Clio and kind of create a Frankenstein. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way. Sometimes there's legitimate reasons to have different softwares that work in concert with each other. But you do need something to collect this data. This is probably the colored circles here. That's probably as close to the best law firm that I've ever seen, where they understood the value of capturing data, they understood that it needed to be good, meaningful data, and they understood that they needed to act on that data. This is the fastest growing law firms in America understand this. It's not just about the size of leads that you have. It's maximizing those leads that you have. It's converting them. One of the speakers earlier talked about, he said, I've talked to a number of law firms, and they all say that their conversion percentage is 90% or 80%. And he said, I think it's really more like 50. And I think if they're lucky, no law firm freely admits what their actual conversion rate is. And the reason is because they're doing it by feel. They don't have the data to show it. And why don't they have the data to show it? What's a common practice in law firms is I only put the intakes that I want into my system. After all, I don't do immigration. I don't do real estate. I don't do any of these other things. So why would I even waste my time in putting it in there? Well, why? Very rich data in demography. Very rich data in analyzing your marketing channels. Very rich data in understanding the time and day that those leads come in. Says nothing about the ability to turn around and monetize those leads and developing referral relationships. Even if you don't directly monetize it in a fee context, you certainly will monetize it in a relationship context. So if you think there's no value in capturing all of your leads, with respect, you're wrong. Total value. So this is where it gets a little dense. Bear with me, it is what it is. So I'm going to cover each of these steps. But the first thing I really want to challenge everybody to do is, everybody, the good thing about working with lawyers, and honestly, there's not a lot of them. That was a joke. I need cue cards to tell you guys to laugh. I was just kidding. But is that you're logicians. Like, it makes sense. If something makes sense, it makes sense. If I can take you through the steps, it makes sense. Don't just collect data because you heard some speaker say it. It needs to make sense to you. If it made sense to you, what I just said about capturing your data, then you need to start thinking about how are we going to do that? What's happening right now? Here's a common mistake. Intake comes in at 10:10 p.m. Susie comes in next morning, has her cup of coffee, kibitzes a little bit, what happened on X streaming show last night, gets to her desk, 9:15, does whatever, checks her voicemail or email, whatever the lead came in, enters it into the system if you're lucky. That intake did not touch your law firm when she entered it into the system. That intake entered your law firm at 10:10. The data on how responsive you are to leads, and this has nothing to do with legal. This is in any professional services or product sales environment. If you respond to a lead in 5 minutes, your conversion rate goes up 80%. You're 80% more likely if you respond to that lead in 5 minutes. So it says nothing about that conversion, but you've lost that data, or worse, you have erroneous data, which is it's in some respects is even worse. Because you could be thinking that, oh my gosh, 9:35 is a hot spot in our firm. What are we doing? Whatever commercial we're running at 9:35 is amazing. Let's keep running it. No, that's just when the data got put in there. So the first thing I'm suggesting is that you discover a business need. You think about, do I need this data? And you test it. That's where I talk about the scientific method. Do you really need that data? What are you going to do with whatever that data is? Be disciplined in your why. Recall the story about Judge Friedman. I knew the game. The game was we had to get the claims process executed, and I needed to figure out the easiest way to get the delta between where the claimant lived and where the optimal location was. And after thinking about it and researching it, that was what made the most sense, and it turned out to work. The other thing, I actually should have made this the big giant slide right here. See the third bullet point, benchmark data whenever possible? I cannot tell you how important this is. If you don't have to raise your hands, but if you have a stock portfolio, maybe you have a financial advisor, if you don't have a benchmark in the financial services industry, how do you know how good your portfolio is performing? Said another way, if you're not comparing it to the S&P or the Dow, how do you know if your return is stronger or weaker? You must benchmark your data. I have a client who is a big TV advertiser in the North. He's in 3 different television markets. Increased his spend on TV. And did it like Wild West kind of stuff. Wasn't a lot of science to it. He just threw money on the different things. Then he has this idea that he's going to fire his internet company and hire another one. Advised him not to. He does it anyways. Well, he didn't read the fine print, and he actually didn't own his website. So he goes dark, has to crawl back to the vendor, get the website back up. It was, not good. He's like, well, I am going to spend many thousands of dollars on SEO and see if that moves the needle more than television. I said, how are you going to know that it was SEO that moved the needle instead of television if you increased your television spend, you changed your vendor, and then you increased the spend on the SEO? You're in a multivariate environment when you are marketing. And if you have to make a change, and as Ken pointed out, very uncommon that you wouldn't make a change in, 22 years? You need to be disciplined in holding the line on the multivariates that you have and change one, establish a benchmark, and measure it. Billboards would be a great example of that. There's not great attribution for how you measure the efficacy of a billboard placement. Some will say, well, I'm going to put a unique number there, and that number is only ever going to be on that billboard, and I'm going to use call rail, and if a call came from that number, that means that the billboard was efficacious. Maybe. I can tell you, if you advertise on TV and you have a vanity number like Win-Win-One or Hurtline or something like that, guess what? Your clients will call that number to talk to you, even though they're not new clients. You cannot rely on just the call data. I'd submit, I would benchmark zip code data. And I would look at how many cases you're getting from that zip code, compare the benchmark a 3, 6, 9-month period, and it's not dispositive, but it's a data point. It's an objective data point that you can look at and consider whether or not that makes sense. Benchmarking is really, really important. Who and what and how we're going to capture this data is important. Is it going to be your intake staff? I recognize that some of you are at different levels here. Some of you come from very sophisticated law firms, and some of you are just like, you're like the guy on the back of the pickup truck where you're just hanging on for dear life and you hope you don't fall off along with the thing that you're trying to keep down. That could be you. And you may not truly, you just may not have time to do some of the things that I'm telling you about, and I recognize some of it just may not be practical. But you do need to understand which butt in which seat is going to be responsible for capturing your data and doing it in a way that is accurate and meaningful. The other thing that I have seen law firms make some mistakes on is they think they know what the data is telling them just by a straight read of it. And I'll tell you a story. I'm going to show you a slide later on. I developed a solution for this problem I'm going to tell you about. So I was at a law firm, and we had a high-performing paralegal. She had been at the firm for close to 20 years, was consistently the high performer. If anybody had an issue with whatever, like anything related to an SOP, client issue, what have you, they would go to this paralegal. Well, we would measure everything. We measured the time from investigation, which we defined as getting a police report, opening up a claim, et cetera, to the time it took to get to MMI, to the time it took to collect the medical records and specials, to the time it took to get to demand. You get the idea. Well, we looked at her data, and it was going off the table. Like she took a nosedive. And I'm thinking, was she getting a divorce? Is there some like personal stuff going on? Like what's going on? Well, I had a light bulb, an epiphany here. And what we recognized is most law firms will look at a total caseload, say of 100 cases, and they'll say, well, Susie's got 100 cases, Jenny's got 100 cases. My expectation is that their work product and their workload would be the same, right? Sounds fair. That's reasonable, 100 and 100. Well, what if the first paralegal's 100 was 40% investigation cases, 40% of the post-MMI kind of getting the special collections, and then the remaining 20% was negotiations or back end or some lighter phase. Whereas the other paralegal is more evenly distributed. Well, I would submit that that's no different than two runners running a 5-mile race, and one runner has a 25-pound pack and the other does not. I'd expect that there would be some atrophy in their travel times, and the person with the lighter weight, all things being equal, would run faster. And as it turned out, that was the case with that paralegal, and I had to devise a system to track that and monitor that differently and shift from the simple metric. So you really do need to think about when you're analyzing the data, what is it telling me and what are all of the possible reasons that it could go another way? Another common mistake that I've seen in law firms is sometimes people can get over-promoted and they know enough to be dangerous. Like you've got a paralegal who's like, the KPI needs to be XYZ, and then if it's not, it needs to be PDQ. Make sure that person knows what goes into the X, what goes into the Y, and what goes into the Z, and why it needs to be the P, D, and the Q. Because if you remand that kind of authority to somebody that has a superficial understanding of a KPI, you will make a mistake. Absolutely, 100%. Then you think about finding the best solution. I am a big believer in sharing data. Now, I know it's not common practice in a lot of firms. A lot of firms are really kind of siloed and tight. I want to be clear, I'm not talking about compensation data. I'm not talking about fee data if you're not comfortable with it. But I do think that there's a concept in technology, I didn't say it, but I founded and exited a legal technology company, GrowPath, and so I was really involved in legal tech for a number of years, and one of the concepts there is this idea of gamification. Just by head nodding, any of you guys heard of that, right? So it's this idea that you can take an arduous task or a mundane task, and you can almost make it kind of fun, like almost competitive or interesting, something like that. And what we have found in the firms that we work with is if we put the numbers out, we have found that yes, depending on the culture, there's some toxic cultures out there, and Susie can get on Jenny, and it can be nasty. So it's this topic for another day, but let it not be mistaken. I think culture is more important than data. That said, if you have a reasonably healthy culture, putting the data out there where people can see how other people are performing can create a healthy, competitive environment where your paralegals don't want to be last. They don't want to see their data points red on a report because it shows that it's overdue. They actually start to compete against themselves. I've seen this work without any sort of financial compensation. I've seen it work in good-natured ways. It's really an underutilized, free and easy tool to be a lot more transparent with data. I would have an open discussion with the results too. It is really important. I'm not a big believer in knowledge hoarding. I have found that I get much more juice out of the turnip by sharing the why with people. I've actually found that it makes you more innovative. One of the reasons I have 29 patents, told you I never took a computer class. How do I possibly have 29 technical patents? I would argue it's precisely because I did not take a computer class and didn't know that couldn't be done until it could. And so when you talk to your paralegals about this data, you might find that there's a medical provider that's a real pain in the ass, that they cannot get records from. I don't just take their word for it. Let's analyze it. Let's subset that, and let's look at the time it takes to get records from Duke or the time it takes to get from Dr. Quack. I trust nobody, and it's not a negative, but I want to see where the data takes me. I'll give you the flip side example of that. I know of a client who they had a spate of bad, I'm dating myself, bad settlements from Intagon, National General now. Well, I wasn't prepared to say Intagon is the new Allstate because this adjuster had like these war stories over the last kind of week and a half. And sure enough, they were anomalous. They were bad facts and bad results, as is often the case. But when you look at the whole picture of the data, you find that, of course, Intagon was higher value than Allstate. But reacting and letting people move on this superficial understanding of data without deeply analyzing it is a great way to get in trouble. You may think this is a simple slide. This is a problem I've seen this be a problem in really small and medium shops. If you allow your decisions to be subjective on things that really ought to be objective, then you end up running your law firm by a committee, whether you want to call it that or not. There's a role in a law firm, and I hope this doesn't come across as sexist. I certainly don't mean it that way, especially because it's the most powerful position in the hive, is the queen bee. Queen bee in your law firm is that kind of senior non-attorney paralegal typically that has been there since forever, knows where the paper clips are, knows where the bad clients are, whatever. Those are the people who, if they have the firm's interest, can be some of the biggest champions and cheerleaders of change in your firm. However, they can also be the one that says, I will take this really poor process and you will pry it from my cold, dead fingers because why? We've always done it that way. Let me tell you a dirty secret that nobody outside this room knows, but everybody inside this room knows it. We are in a high-margin business, and it suffers a lot of idiocy. Just because you're profitable doesn't mean you're running a good law firm. And if you think about that and accept that that just might be true, what if you shaved 20% off of the case age and increased your average settlement by 20%? Put that on a spreadsheet. So when you make a decision and it's objective and you've thought about it and you've applied the scientific method, I don't care what the queen bee says. Your first loyalty needs to be to your firm. Same with the queen bee. Okay, here we go. So there's 1,000 different ways that you can use data. I tried to be as high level and then get as little granular as I could. This is just a highbrow view. If you think you can't use data in litigation, you're wrong. The other side is using data in litigation. Risk indices have been around forever. Nick was on the defense side. I saw him nodding on that, right? Like, it's fact. If you're not using data, you're a fool because the other side is. The other side, they know if you're litigating or not. How do they know that? Data. Okay, so this is just, I want to be clear, this is just an example of a firm's business intelligence tool. So this is a tool, any major platform should be able to integrate with this. Some of them have them embedded. This is just an example of one that's in GrowPath. But what this does is if you look at, on the extreme right, that's the time of the intakes came in. That's the date the intakes came in. You see the DMAs, the type, the marketing source. This is at-a-glance data. Why didn't I show you guys this, the first slide? Because this is the sexy slide, isn't it? Isn't this what you guys are all interested in? Because the question when you leave here is going to be, how the hell do I get that? And so I needed to walk you down the aisle because it takes work, it takes discipline to get to that. Because if you're running a needles database where you don't care and it's the Wild West of what gets in there, you won't get this. You see that curve right there on the right? If it says that an intake came in at 2:45 in the morning for this firm, an intake came in at 2:45 in the morning. So the firm says, well, why would a intake come in at 2:45 in the morning like that? Well, because it was a make good. They didn't get their commercials run and their normal TV buy, and so they just shot them in the early morning, and people called. That's a data point. That tells you something. I will tell you, I have never seen a law firm get good, get great, by a pie chart alone. It's not the pie chart. It's not this flashy shit. That's not what gets you there. Excuse my French, I'm former Marine. It's understanding what that means. If you see 39% auto here, and you're an auto firm, that's probably a bad data point. Or you're not an auto firm. So you need to keep your own counsel on what's important, but you do need to act, or don't keep it. It's just a waste of time. Demography, this is fantastic. So one of the things that I've seen more and more is we're starting to see kind of the aging out, right? The boomers are getting ready to hand things back to Gen Z. Gen Z is now dealing with, Gen X, Y, whatever they're called now these days, right? And we're trying to figure out what's going on. How's our marketing working? Demography has really never been more important. Some firms are not comfortable asking race at the intake process. I understand that. But things like gender, age, where they live, anything you can think of, anything that you can imagine a political campaign would be interested in, you should also be thinking about that. And let me tell you, with respect to the vendors out there, and I don't mean to say that any vendor out there is a bad actor or duplicitous or disingenuous, but nobody cares about your firm like you. Nobody. So you better know what your marketing channels are doing. Don't let your internet guy tell you that they're killing it on your website traffic. I mean, it's nuts. They've never seen website traffic like that. You're their best performing client ever. I can see the smirks in here. You guys have heard that. Well, then the data better back it up, because if the data that I'm getting is from Afghanistan, like I'm not really interested in representing auto accidents in Afghanistan. I want to know where that lead's coming from. I want to know if it's somebody that's trending on the older side. I want to look at the media buy that I'm doing. If I'm doing TV or if I'm doing the internet, am I focusing on the right things? Are my pay-per-click words? All of that stuff. This is all related. Everything goes into demography. This is an example of a firm using data in litigation. So this particular practice area is in eminent domain. And essentially what this is, if you think about each little list in there, each one of those little lists is like a report. And I don't know if you can see it. You can see it in the PDF that you have a little bit more clearly, but client contact needed for lit, no activity for 45 days, case review. This was discovery back to the Department of Transportation, et cetera. So this firm uses their data in a very sophisticated way because they mandate that their paralegals put key data points into their system. Then they extract that data points using an array of native tools to their case management software or business intelligence tools or even spreadsheets. But it can be done. It can be done. And I have seen very successful firms do this pretty significantly. We need to get humming here. So this is an example of another case management platform that's using Power BI here. Here we go. Let's get to key performance indicators. So this is just kind of a kitschy thing. You know, KPIs keep people involved, inspired. This is what I was talking about, gamification. Little sidebar, it really doesn't have anything to do with data, probably more aligned with culture. If you come from this conference and you go to your shop and you decree what the next KPI will be for your paralegals, I will show you a law firm that will fail. So in another life, I was a youth pastor, if you can believe that. And one of the key things that I learned very early on is you had to earn the right to be heard. You had to engage with that person. And if you read any business, I mean, I'm a student of leadership. I read entirely too many business books, and I'm reading articles every day. And one of the key themes that you're going to see is to make your people feel that they have a purpose and that they're a partner. I'm not telling you to not decree a KPI. I'm telling you to have a conversation and to create ownership and to bring them along. Yes, it may take you 2 weeks instead of 2 hours, but I promise you the dividends that it will pay you will be infinite. So this is pretty much it. Define your goals, track them regularly, and it has to be measurable. If your KPI is fuzzy, it's a poorly designed KPI. It really should be objective. What happens in a lot of law firms is you get a lot of personality infighting. You'll get a lot of that kind of stuff. We've all dealt with it. All of us want to be treated fairly. All of us want to create a paradigm where it's clearly understood what the expectations are and what the results need to be. You, as the business owner, have an obligation to make sure that they can be met. If we're out a basketball team and you say, hey, Sanchez, suit up. You're going to be playing the 5 position. You're going to be the center. It's going to be a bad day for your basketball team because I'm 5'2". The KPI has got to be possible. You need to be reasonable. And it needs to be able to be measured. I am not even going to, we don't have the time for me to go over this, take this home, but this is really kind of an academic review of the types of KPIs that you can have. So KPIs can be a real sexy word, but it can be so powerful in your law firm. In fact, I'm not really aware of a well-run law firm that doesn't have a modicum of KPIs. They may not call it KPIs. They may call it their morning report and look at data on it or, whatever. I mean data point that is important to your enterprise that you're measuring, and it's an indication of the health of your enterprise. I just call it KPI. You can call it a morning report. But it does need to meet those standards and in these areas. This is kind of a high level over this kind of important things from revenue to marketing, average case length. Average case length is an important one just to touch on really quickly. A lot of law firms will look at what's my average fee. I signed 100 cases and my average fee is $10,000. Well, that's great. Is it? What is a more valuable case? One that you got a $10,000 fee in 6 months or a $10,000 fee in 36 months? Obvious answer, right? Well, the problem is not a lot of firms look at that. A lot of them do not. They kind of run their firm in a cash flow analysis where I just care about the fees that are coming in. I hit my nut. Whew, all right, on to the next month. Well, you could be investing in fool's gold, and I'm not going to take a shot. I have some favorite practice areas and some practice areas I'm not a fan of, but some of those are really long tooth to get a relatively small amount of a fee. So I like to look at how many months did it take to get that fee and do the math, and what's my carrying cost on that type of a case. If I look at it on a one-off, it's not worth anything. If I look at it in an aggregate, it's worth everything. Here's examples of different KPIs. So I will try, first of all, let me say this. I will be available after. I'm running out of time, so I'm really going a lot faster. I apologize. But me and my partner, Stacie, will be standing in the back, happy to answer any questions that you might have on this stuff. So I apologize for moving quickly. So here's just a couple of examples. So one of the, it's kind of hard to read there, but the black box there, if you have it on your PDF, you could probably see it a little bit more clearly. This is a law firm, Wilder Pantasis in Charlotte, that their Google reviews, they average 5.0 Google reviews. That's nuts, right? They average 5.0 Google reviews. The problem is they have 50 Google reviews. Well, it's a lot easier to average 5.0 with 50. But if I have 4,000 Google reviews and I'm averaging 4.8, man, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's a pretty important data point to pay attention to, don't you think? Most law firms don't. They say, I need Google reviews. I think they're important. Well, it's time to start measuring it. A really, really easy tool, if you take nothing else from this, the use of note topics, or depending on your case management system, a hashtag, some ability, what I mean by a note topic is some ability to categorize the note. So if you're, for example, this is a great example. Let's say your firm, well, let me ask you, pop quiz. I think every lawyer in here knows the answer to this. Number one complaint to the bar about lawyers is what? Communication. Communication. If you want to be a high-performing law firm, you must have a proactive rubric of case management. You need to anticipate the client call and not react to the client call. I don't want to be called by the client to learn that they missed 10 doctor's appointments 6 months after their last one. I want to have a rubric that requires my paralegals to call every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, whatever it is in your firm. I don't want to take their word for it. I want to track that. So if my case management system, my intake system has the ability to track the note topic, I'm going to mandate that every client contact have the note topic or hashtag of client contact. And I'm going to have the date on that. Most modern case management platforms already have that for you. Then you would be able to determine definitively how often they're talking to your clients. Objective. Then we can subset that into the substance of it. I can go a whole sidebar on that. But it is really important to start thinking about how to organize your data to get those meaningful KPIs. This is an example of a firm, I think this is a Neos using, this is Filevine using firm. So this is not something you can get Filevine. This is something that I had to build for this law firm because FileVine was their case management system, but they couldn't do anything with the data because they didn't know how to track it. So I had to go in there, and I do this every day for them automatically, as I built a widget that I pull out their data, I organize it, and I deliver it to them. Does the paralegal call this KPIs? I don't know, but the law firm makes them pay attention to it, because if they're not below the standards, then the queen bee is going to take them to the woodshed. This is an example of the same kind of concept in NEO. So you see on the left there, it's highlighted. So this particular firm, on a soft tissue case, they want their clients to be talked to every 14 days. Again, just as an aside, why? Because if I don't treat for 14 days and it's a chiropractic case, probably something bad's going to happen. So I need to make sure that they're staying on top of that. This is just a kind of a collection of things that you can track really pretty easily if you think about it. If you have the requirement of your paralegals opening claims, then simply capture the date that the claim was opened. By just capturing the date, you capture the number, you capture the time, you capture the amount in that week. Same thing with status changes. Some case management platforms, I know GrowPath does this automatically. Some others will have you put in a date. However it is, you capture the status changes. There's so many things that you can do just by requiring your staff. Now, your staff will tell you, if this is new to your law firm, it's too burdensome, I can't do it, you're making me push the boulder up the hill. This is one of those areas where I would tell you, this is a hill to die on. This is not a nice to have, it's a must have. Your case management system must be the single source of truth in your law firm. I'm not telling you to over-collect data. I'm telling you to collect meaningful data, data that you're going to act upon. And in some instances, you might not even know that you're going to act upon it, or it's going to take you a while to do it because you'll need a critical mass of data before you can derive any meaningful intelligence from it. Let me say that a different way. If I want to know the average amount of time my soft tissue cases are treating, and I leave here and I say, we're going to start checking this out tomorrow. Next week, you might have what? 4, 5, 10 data points? Not enough. So you might need to let it build up and go a month, 6 months, whatever you think is appropriate. This particular platform, again, sorry, using GrowPath again here, but they have the ability to track things like how much activity is happening in a particular, from a case manager in the application. So if you have a case manager that's working from home on a particular day, this tracks how much server traffic is going back and forth between their computer and the application. So it's saying, hey, this person is talking to me or not. And the number one excuse is, well, I was reviewing medical records. Well, keep your own counsel on whether or not they were reviewing medical records. I alluded to this earlier. Remember I talked about the paralegal that had 100 cases and the other paralegal had 100 cases? This is a report that I developed. I call it the Gravity Report. And what I did is I understood this particular firm's, what was required in each and every status of the life of an average auto case. And in status A, I thought, well, that would, and this is a little subjective, but it was an educated subjectivity, where I said, well, I know status A, they have a lot of client contact in status A, but it's really should only be 2 months. That's a pretty light status. So if they had 20 cases in that, I'm going to give it a multiplier of like 0.25. If they're post-MMI and I'm collecting the specials, that's really burdensome because they got to reach out to the providers, they got to collect all the specials, got to review the medical records. I'm going to give that a multiplier of, say, 1.5. Well, what did I do there? I built a little algorithm. And the beautiful thing is, it could be your algorithm. It doesn't have to be my algorithm. In fact, it should be your algorithm. Keep your own counsel on how burdensome those things are. And then what I did is, by having this data, I learned that the optimal number of cases that a paralegal should have that are post-MMI, again, in this firm, was about 20%. I saw a productivity drop-off when their cases that were post-MMI exceeded 20%. That's what happened with that paralegal. And so we had to move files to make it more equitable, and her productivity shot up.